Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll start off with a weather update for this morning. I've got the Assistant Commissioner from Queensland Fire and Emergency Services here, Matt Bulow, and then we'll talk about the government's plans to tighten up the Child Protection Offender Register framework and powers for police, and then obviously take some questions on other issues. As many Queenslanders would have experienced over the last 24 to 48 hours, we're feeling the beginning of the wet season that's been predicted by the Bureau of Meteorology. The Bureau of Meteorology said get ready for the rain, get ready for the early onset of rain, and get ready for more intense rain than what we're usually used to. And of course, we're experiencing that right now. There is some very important reminders though for people. That is, listen to the advice from the Bureau of Meteorology and the authorities. They will provide you with the best guidance around the weather impacts for your particular area. We are well versed when it comes to responding to extreme weather. Of course, our emergency services, our police, our volunteers, our councils and community organisations are well rehearsed, and we're well resourced when it comes to responding to heavy and intense weather events. The key though is we all have a responsibility. Responsibility to keep informed and a responsibility to always prioritise your safety, the safety of your family and friends, and the safety of emergency service staff, officers and volunteers. There's a big thing that people can do when there's extreme, intense, heavy rainfall, and that is don't take any risks when it comes to being on our roads. What the Weather Bureau's forecast is, of course, more intense, heavy rainfall over this spring period and into the summer period. That means that there is a greater risk of more flash flooding and riverine and creek rises in your area. With that greater risk comes a greater danger of you being caught in floodwaters. So if there's ever any risk, if there's ever any concern, please, I implore everyone, and I thank the media for obviously relaying and reinforcing these messages. If it's flooded, forget it. Do not enter floodwaters. Do not take any risks when it comes to extreme, heavy or intense weather events. I'll now ask the Assistant Commissioner to provide a bit of a wrap-up and some further information.
Minister. Yeah, good morning everyone. So there is currently heavy rainfall across southeast Queensland, which may lead to flash flooding in some areas. We really are after people to remain vigilant. Now is not the time to be out on the roads if you don't need to be. It really is important that if you do find areas or roads that are flooded, that you turn around, you back it up, and most importantly, if it's flooded, forget it. Now overnight, or since 5 a.m. yesterday, the State Emergency Service has received 167 requests for assistance, mostly in the Brisbane, Sunshine Coast and Fraser Coast areas. Most of those requests for assistance are in relation to leaky roofs and minor sandbagging requests. Fire and rescue crews have also done one water-related rescue overnight. That was also up in the Fraser Coast area as well. It really is important for members of the community to keep up to date with all the warnings. All of those can be found on the Bureau of Meteorology website, and also keep up to date with all the latest updates on radio and on our social media pages as well. Thank you.
Any questions about the weather?
Could you just go into a little bit more about the rescue that happened at the Fraser Coast, please?
Yeah, so it wasn't a swiftwater rescue. It was a water-related rescue up in the Fraser Coast. It was actually in the community of, I've got it here. It was in the community of Bauple, B-A-U-P-L-E, and basically the individual was just relocated to a safe area.
Like a lady or a man?
I don't have the details of the gender, but the individual requested assistance. Our fire and rescue crews responded, and it was a very easy relocation to a safe spot for the individual.
So that's separate to the incident the night before with the 85-year-old?
That's it, yeah. Thank you.
Minister, can I ask about the dams?
Yes.
Are you confident they're holding up, and will the government look at releases, proactive releases over the next couple of months.
No, thanks very much for that. So obviously we get regular briefings from the Bureau. In fact, I was part of a briefing for the Premier this morning as well, and we get briefings regularly around the dams. The advice from the dam operators is that the dams are operating as intended in accordance with the manuals they're holding up. As announced 2 weeks ago by the Premier, there have been some proactive releases from Wivenhoe. Those proactive releases are obviously continuing, but that is in accordance with the best advice of for dam operators, as well as also from the Weather Bureau.
Well, those proactive releases, would they have made some catchments more saturated than they otherwise would have?
Look, you know, the advice I've got is that they're well managed, they're well structured around ensuring that the impact of any dam releases on communities is minimal. To put it in context, we were advised this morning the dam releases during the major flood event at the beginning of the year were about 3,000 cubic metres. These ones at the moment are about 400 cubic metres, so well below the releases of earlier this year, and in accordance with the best advice of dam operators, and of course to minimise any impacts to community.
Is there releases also from North Pine Dam, you know that?
Yes, there is obviously always some impacts around there, with Young's Crossing Road being impacted. I understand that Young's Crossing Road will be closed for a number of days, but that is what people in that local community are aware of and are well versed in and are very experienced in. I live on the north side, I live at Caboolture, so well aware of what happens when it rains and how it impacts Young Crossing Road. And just a final point on weather, just to reinforce the message for all Queenslanders, this is consistent with the Weather Bureau advice. This is the beginning of an intense, heavy weather system, not the end. It's the beginning. So please make sure you have plans around your own safety, around being prepared for a heavy, intense weather system that we will experience over the next couple of months. It's about your safety and the safety of your fellow Queenslanders.
Minister, thousands of text messages went out yesterday.
Yes.
From the Brisbane City Council. Was that overkill or not?
Look, the Inspector General of Emergency Management had a fair bit to say around the need for layering when it comes to messaging. It's not just about emergency alerts, it's about the council messaging system, it's about social media, and it's about formal media, more traditional media outlets. You know, look, I commend any council who wants to be proactive with reinforcing messages of safety and preparation with their community.
Okay. I have some questions about that relate to the safety of children and also women and men and the entire community.
Yes, I know, Dave. Yeah.
So I want to know, are you going to seriously suggest today, as you did a couple of weeks ago, that you were not briefed about the DNA lab until late May or thereabouts?
Yeah. Well, you know, I read your article, and you know, I note you referred to that, and you know, if you look at the transcript from that particular press conference, I said, you know, best of my knowledge, it was late May, and that if anyone needed any further information, we'd provide it. We did check the exact dates. I was formally made aware on the 2nd of June and formally briefed on the 6th of June.
Kirsty Wright, who's a highly respected
Understand.
scientist, called for the lab to be shut down in November last year, publicly. The police service immediately started raising their own concerns that continued for months afterwards. You weren't briefed about that.
Well, in that press conference, and I'll say it again today, I was disappointed that that was not briefed up. I wasn't briefed, but I should have been.
In March, the Australian reported that criminals were better off in Queensland because of a very high threshold that was brought in. You weren't briefed about that. Why didn't you ask? That was on the front page of the newspaper.
Look, I understand. I seek information from my agencies all the time. I was not made aware of the matter until the 2nd of June.
You were made aware on the front page of the Australian newspaper. Everyone in this room knows that every little matter that's in the newspaper gets followed up by ministers. Why didn't you follow up this very serious story that rapists and murderers were better off in Queensland?
As I made clear, Dave, I was disappointed that I was not briefed about the matter. I seek information from my agencies all the time, and I was not provided with the briefing on that matter until the 2nd of, not made aware until the 2nd of June, and not formally briefed until the 6th of June.
In March, the Australian reported that
I know you've said
Wright
that.
went to the Crime and Corruption Commission and reported suspected corrupt conduct. That again was on the front page of the newspaper, along with the thresholds the previous month. You didn't ask the police for a briefing on that.
Dave, I seek information from my agencies all the time, and I was not made aware of the matter until the 2nd of June.
So when you say you seek information, so you did ask?
In preparing for Parliament, I regularly get information from my agencies about issues that are in the media.
So are those documents, those briefings that you've received in asking questions, have they been passed to the DNA inquiry?
I'm not sure about the information that's been requested by the Commission of Inquiry. Obviously, they're able to request information from agencies and other people.
Why was, I've just got a couple more, no, sorry, I've just got 2 more questions.
I'm happy to answer
Why-
these questions.
thank you. Why was a ministerial briefing note drawn up in February and then not sent to you?
You'd have to ask the police agency about that.
Why was an executive briefing note drawn up in February
You'd
and
have
a
to
letter
ask-
from the police commissioner and submitted, but then withdrawn by a superintendent and not provided to you?
You'd have to ask the police service about that.
Well,
I've
haven't you
expressed
asked? Haven't you
no.
asked?
I've expressed my disappointment about that.
So you've asked about why this wasn't given to you?
Yes,
And what was the answer?
that's a matter that the police agency will have to answer.
Why can't you answer? You asked the question.
I asked the question. I got an answer. I expressed my disappointment about it,
Isn't this your job to ask questions?
And I did.
To get answers?
and I did. I asked the question.
What, can you share any answers that you've got?
Those answers are obviously a matter for the Commission of Inquiry to consider. Dave, I made it very clear to the agency and to the Commissioner that I was very disappointed that this matter was not briefed up to me. There were a number of opportunities for the matter to be briefed up and I wasn't briefed. And I've expressed that disappointment. Okay? It's a serious matter. I take it very seriously.
Do you think you should be appearing at the inquiry?
That's a matter for the Commission.
Would you be happy to appear at the inquiry?
I'm always happy to answer questions. Okay?
I'm just equal.
Okay. We'll talk about changing legislation. Denzel, Julie. Thank you, Matt. Very good. All right. Thanks very much for coming to hear about some of the ways that we are going to strengthen the Child Protection Offender Register framework here in Queensland. Many Queenslanders would already appreciate that our Child Protection Offender Register framework is amongst the strongest in the nation. Not only has Queensland often been a first mover when it has come to strengthening laws around dangerous prisoners, sex offenders and child sex offenders, but we are also regarded as not only having some of the best people in the world for enforcing the law and investigating these heinous crimes, but also for having some of the toughest laws around police powers and consequences for those people who seek to offend against children. So this week the government will be introducing a bill into Parliament to further strengthen police powers when it comes to offenders who are on the Child Protection Offender Register. These powers will provide police with additional options around inspecting devices, attending premises for the purpose of inspecting devices, and is conscious around the changing technology that is available in our society, which obviously offenders seek to use to try and defeat not only police powers but police efforts when it comes to detecting child sex offending and intervening as early as possible. One thing the research shows when it comes to child sex offenders is continual monitoring, continual intervention are ways that we can intercept and inhibit child sex offenders from reoffending. Certainly the Queensland Police Service has had some boost in resources over the last few years around the Child Protection Offender Register Coordinator resources. That has allowed us to do more proactive work. But that proactive work also needs the legislative framework to ensure that offenders aren't keeping ahead of the authorities when it comes to the use of technology. Queensland's, as I've said, been often a first mover on this. We have one of the toughest, strongest frameworks in the nation when it comes to these particular police powers. And with the legislation that we're introducing next week, in another Australian first, we take another step to keep ahead of technology as best we can and to ensure that offenders are held to account, and that we have the best possible system in place to monitor and supervise child sex offenders so that we can do whatever we can to prevent them from reoffending and causing harm to further children. I've got Acting Detective Chief Superintendent Denzel Clark here to provide some further commentary, and Detective Inspector Julie Duncan from the Child Protection Offender Register team is here as well to answer any specific questions people might have about the registry and the work that the police do. Denzel, did you want to say anything?
Well, I'll be prepared to answer any questions,
Okay, yeah,
Minister,
sure.
if there are any questions in relation to the legislation or how it may be used operationally.
Have there been instances where the current legislation has hampered police efforts that you can talk to?
Yeah, it certainly creates difficulties for us when it comes to entering a premises to conduct a device inspection, and technology is being used by our offenders to defeat our examination of devices. So this legislation will go a very long way to evening up the playing field to allow us access to these premises, to inspect these devices and to hold these offenders accountable.
So at the moment, you can go into a place, a house, and inspect the devices, or what?
No,
How's that work?
at the moment our power of entry is in relation to confirming reportable offenders' personal details. When it comes to a device inspection, we do not have that current power. We have to do it with the consent of the person, or we have to do it outside the premises.
And that'll change under this?
Correct.
So you'll just be able to go and inspect if you want to?
Yes, there are certain provisions around the entry and who we can inspect their devices, but yes, it's certainly a very broad expansion of what our current framework is.
Okay. And when you say about the use of technology, are they using things to indicate that it does, that the monitor's working or whatever, but it's actually off and in a cupboard somewhere, or what's happening?
We're not talking about electronic monitoring devices. We're actually talking about internet-enabled devices, storage devices, etc. Yeah.
Okay. In relation to what they're downloading, etc.
So there's a cohort of offenders out there who use electronic mediums to access, possess, distribute child exploitation material. They use devices to access and abuse children, and they use devices to consult and engage with other child sex offenders to justify and proliferate the abuse of children. So they're the devices that we'll be targeting.
Mr. Cast, just another matter.
Yeah, nothing else on this? Okay.
No confidence powers. The police commissioner has brought this up, obviously. Is that something that you back? And if so, when can we expect to see law changes in respect to that?
Yeah. I think it's really important to see what conclusions the Commission of Inquiry comes to. We've got some very informed legal minds participating in the Commission of Inquiry. Let's see what they recommend in respect of the police discipline system. I think anyone who has been observing the evidence provided before the Commission of Inquiry will reasonably suspect that the Commission of Inquiry should make some recommendations about the police discipline system, but let's wait and see what they recommend, and then government will consider those
I think
recommendations.
the Premier's indicated that she supports it, so are you still weighing it up?
No, I've discussed the matter with her office. The Premier in that press conference said that she supports the Commissioner, and obviously we'll wait for the Commission of Inquiry to provide its recommendations.
And then how fast can we expect law changes in the wake of this inquiry? Should we expect, next year that the government will be introducing?
Well, let's see what the recommendations are. I know it's probably likely that the Commission of Inquiry will recommend some law changes or some different approaches to police policy, but we don't know what they are until those recommendations are made. So let's wait and see. It's only a couple of weeks away, middle of November.
Do you think the current disciplinary processes are enough to get rid of officers who are not up to standards?
Yeah, for the vast majority of people, I think the police discipline system works very well and very effectively. But there has obviously been some examples provided through the Commission of Inquiry where that system has not only failed the community, but also failed police officers and police staff. And to the extent that there are police officers and staff who don't have confidence in aspects of the police discipline system, particularly that application of the LMR, the localised managerial resolution. So certainly I would expect that the Commission of Inquiry will have some commentary and some suggestions about how to improve that.
Minister, there was some talk today that Paul Palaszczuk, the former Mayor of Ipswich, was going to get out of jail today. Where's that up to?
That's a matter I can't comment on, obviously. You know, the parole board makes decisions around prisoners who have applied for parole. You know, you're welcome to ask the parole board whether they've made a decision in respect of any other prisoner, but I suspect their answer will be the same as mine, and that is that legislation restricts the information in respect of prisoners in certain instances.
Just on the RBWH,
Oh, yes.
today, why is that practice still happening? Why are women who have lost a baby still in the same wards with women, you know, who have just had babies? Why is that practice still happening?
I think everyone can appreciate that those examples which we've seen would be very traumatic for those women involved, and obviously for anyone who's experienced it, you know, whether it's the named person in the newspaper or just generally, you know, my heart just breaks for them. You know, people here know that my wife and I had a new baby a couple of weeks ago. You know, we experienced the joy of childbirth, but I can just imagine the tragedy and devastation that those women would be experiencing. So I support Minister Darth's approach, and that practice is unacceptable and it needs to change. And the advice that I've got is that that process is changing. Obviously, there are clinical decisions that get made from time to time in the circumstances. They are decisions for the clinicians and health experts to make. But certainly I support Minister Darth in her view that that situation is unacceptable and it needs to change.
She said in November last year that it would end. Why do you think we're now up to October this year? Why has it taken so long? Do you think it's taken too long for that change to happen?
Look, the advice I've been given is that obviously just after that remark was made, the full-blown impact of COVID was being felt in our hospital systems. So obviously those impacts will have to be dealt with by clinicians and health experts. But now that those impacts are over, I join Minister Darth in supporting the view that that needs to change and that the current system is unacceptable.
And do you think Minister Darth, is she doing a good job as health minister?
Of course she is.
Why?
Oh, she's an exceptional Minister for Health. Not only has she had to deal with some quite significant challenges and pressures within the health system, but she's actually got results on the board. You know, she is the health minister who, in the last state budget, got almost an extra $10 billion in health infrastructure committed by the government. She's constantly fighting for her agency and department, and that's something I commend her for.
Do you think health's becoming a drag on the government, though? It just seems like day after day there's a new health story coming out that's not really great for the government.
Well, let me put it this way. The health department is got over 100,000 employees, and all of them are exceptional Queenslanders. They're in service of their fellow Queenslander, the doctors, the nurses, the allied health professionals, the support staff. I think we can be truly proud of the efforts that those Queenslanders make every day on our behalf. And yes, it's a difficult portfolio. It's certainly a difficult matter to deal with because you're dealing with, you know, people's healthcare needs. But those Queenslanders I commend for the great work that they do, and I commend Minister Darth for the great work she does.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions from you, Dave?
So for today.
Okay, good on you. Thank you.